Non-state actors can affect development in countries both positively and negatively.
So, firstly, we'll be talking about terrorism and how terrorists, as a non-state actor, they impact development. Till date, there is no universally agreed definition of terrorism, and every country has their own different way of categorizing what group is a terrorist group or not. But for the sake of uniformity, we'll be using the UN definition, which describes terrorism as criminal acts intended or calculated to provoke a state of terror in the general public, a group of persons or particular people, or for political purposes in any circumstance that is unjustifiable. And terrorism is of two types: there's state-induced terrorism and there's non-state terrorism. But today we'll be focusing on non-state terrorism, which is basically terrorism that is started by non-state actors, which includes but is not limited to feuding minorities or religious minorities.
It's related to what? Feuding minorities?
Feuding. Over 250 people died in the Easter bombing attacks in 2019 in Sri Lanka. It is said to be the worst terror attack after the 9/11 attacks. And this major incident caused extreme disruption in the fragile country of Sri Lanka. As you know, that Sri Lanka had a very long civil war, and after that they had a stable government for some time, but they're suffering from an economic crisis because of the nepotism in the government. So Sri Lanka is a country that a major part of its economy, it comes from tourism, and it contributes to around $1.9 billion in the economy per year for the government. So when these bombings happened, 44 foreign nationals died, and it was a big thing in the international media. So a lot of people were like, the attention of countries was focused on Sri Lanka, and a lot of countries, they gave the red advisory, which is like, you should not travel to these countries. And due to that, Sri Lanka lost $1.9 billion in its revenue for 2019. And many believe that it is one of the reasons that contributed to the factors that Sri Lanka is facing now, which is the economic crisis, due to which they have also fallen prey to China's debt policy, and they have lost one of their most strategic ports, which is the Hambantota port. And similar were also examples in Egypt, Tunisia, and Indonesia as well, where terrorist attacks took place and a travel advisory was put in place. And a lot of, a major sector of the economy is tourism. So that's how terrorist groups have been impacting tourism, because they've been impacting the revenue that the government makes. We'll also be covering intergovernmental organizations, which are organizations that are primarily composed of sovereign states, and they are bound by treaties which are governed by the international law, and they include the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, EU, etc. The World Bank is a family of 5 multilateral institutions which are focused on economic development in the world, and their overarching mission is to elevate people from poverty. And it was established by the Western powers for basically initially rebuilding the economic power of Europe, but now they've extended to all other countries as well. And their goal, according to the World Bank, their goal is to end extreme poverty and to grow income for the poorest people on the planet. The bank does this by lending money, giving grants to governments and private corporations in some of the least developed places on planet Earth. So, since a major part of the World Bank's work is working in third world countries and their upliftment, they have been working a lot in Africa particularly for helping the African farmers when it comes to agriculture. But it was noticed that despite 15 years that the bank has focused on boosting food production in Africa, the per capita production in Africa has fallen by almost 20%. And an analysis shows that much of the investment in agriculture, especially the domestic component of countries, has gone into state farms, big irrigation schemes, and similar capital-intensive activities, which have largely turned out to be a waste of money. Also, the bank has been promoting coffee and cocoa in Africa because they are expensive goods and they have greater revenues. But the soil in some countries is unsuitable for their production. So that's why those countries are particularly suffering more, because they're getting money specifically for those things that they're not able to grow. And another example, a more particular example that happened in Kenya, was that they gave money for forest development and agricultural development in the country. However, that led to displacement of a native tribe in that country. So it again leads to the question, how much is World Bank facilitating development, or is it having negative effects? But it also has some positive examples. So this is the South Asia Water Initiative, which was funded by the United Kingdom, Australia, Norway, and was administered by the World Bank. And this closed in June of 2021 when the project was over. And it was a decade of work to increase the regional cooperation in managing major Himalayan river systems and rebuilding their climate resilience. And basically what they did was strengthening awareness and knowledge about regional water issues, enhancing technical and policy capacity, because they had built infrastructure on some rivers which helped the countries, supporting dialogue and participatory decision process to build trust, and improving World Bank investments in South Asia. And these are on the rivers Ganges, Indus, Brahmaputra, and is also in the Sundarban wetlands, which is like a river basin shared between Bangladesh and India. And it included 7 countries, which was Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. So this is a success story of the World Bank, but like there are other repercussions too. There's a lot of controversy between the World Bank's development and human rights, because a lot of people think that even if it's funding projects like dams, it is displacing people from their native land, and even if it says that they agreed to be moved from that land, the story on ground is very different. So it still remains a controversial issue whether IGOs have been helping in development or whether they're reducing development in the country.
So I'm going to talk about NGOs, non-governmental organizations. So non-governmental organizations can target specific needs or basic needs that we talked about that a country may need to develop further. Mary's Meals is an NGO that gives food in specific areas that are very poor to give nurse so the kids can go to school. So it doesn't only target the basic need of being fed, but also targets the well-being and into education and being educated and then being able to provide in the country and further develop the country. However, this can also go against development because there might be local organizations or local factors that are doing the same, but then a non-governmental organization from another country will try and help them and will ruin it for the local developments that are helping these get better. Also, non-NGOs are also dependent on the government to get support, so there have been issues in India and Pakistan where they have banned NGOs that are trying to help. So once again, NGOs can't do that much on their own. Then there's also a link to environmental development. Nestle is a MCN, which is also a non-state actor. Nestle is a really big company, and it's founded in Switzerland, so it has been giving a lot of economic development to Switzerland and make sure that Switzerland has a flourishing economy. On the other hand, it has had a lot of negative impacts in a lot of other countries that Nestle also works in. For example, in 2013, the corporation began diverting groundwater in Pakistan, and by that diverting clean water from Pakistani locals and using it for their factories, leaving the population with no other choice except to drink sewage and sludge water. This is a clear example that the water they're using is very often groundwater and is very often taken from places that have low resources of speaking up and claiming their water as their own. This has also been done in other countries. Also, in a lot of the chocolate that they have, they're using cocoa plants from local farms in developing countries. Now it's been faced criticism for using child labor in these farms. Now Nestle argues that this isn't their responsibility because this is family farms and the family are deciding themselves to use children because they can't afford to pay others to work on their farms. This doesn't make sense because Nestle is the one paying these farms to give cocoa, so they should pay them more, and they are above them and therefore responsible to make sure that they don't need to use child labor. Also in 2020, a Nestle milk powder plant in France released biological waste in the local water bodies and killed around 3 metric tons of fish because of this. So once again, their plantations, their farms in other countries, and basically their production in all other countries except for Switzerland is harming the development in that country. However, in Switzerland, it's making the economy flourish. And that's the answer.
Yay.